Hello there and welcome to the channel. As the title might suggest, this is going to be a slightly different video than usual. I'll probably give it some dramatic YouTube drama-y sounding title, but essentially what I'm going to talk about here is that I've recently tried to analyze a few of Vaush's debates. I was looking for more content to produce and I thought, well, Vaush is a guy I can rely on to sort of debate reasonably well, but with a few flaws that I can sort of hone in on and like extract learning experiences or whatever you want to call it from that, so I can explain why he's gone wrong and how I would do it better. Unfortunately, though, I've just been completely unable to get through Vaush's debates recently. So in this video, what I'm going to do is go over like the first part of Vaush's debate with Destiny on the Modern Day Debate channel, which was a free-form debate about all sorts of topics. Then I'm going to talk about another debate he did with TJump on gender, which Nolan Barger and I have been discussing in the comments of a previous video. And I think that debate really highlighted some issues at the core of Vaush's output. Like I started to realize, oh, this is the problem underlying all of Vaush's other problems. And then I'm going to throw in some general criticisms of Vaush's channel as well at the end. So altogether, I'm going to explain why I've kind of given up on Vaush and why I won't really be analysing his debates any further after I've done a few of them on this channel. And I'm going to end with sort of looking forward some future of the channel stuff, some changes, nothing too radical, but some new content that I hope to be producing soon. Let's dive straight in then to the modern day debate. I'll leave a link to it down below so you can follow along. I'm going to include references for specific points, but there might not be that many since I didn't finish the analysis, so it's not as fully fleshed out as usual. I did watch this debate because I wanted to pick up on body language. They're together in person, which is quite rare. This video was filmed in March of last year, so I can only assume it was meant for a live audience that didn't happen because of lockdown restrictions. I can't figure out why else they'd have them in the same room like this. Body language-wise, there wasn't much to talk about. Vaush, possibly because he anticipated an audience, is sort of mugging more and is more jokey than usual. Doesn't really work without a live crowd to laugh. It looks quite awkward. Destiny, hunched forward, looks quite sulky, but I think that's just because he's debating Vaush and he knows exactly how it's going to go. My expectation was that having the two together in the same room would make things more civil and polite, because that just always seems to happen when people are actually in the room together as opposed to speaking over the internet. Like one of the first debates I did, Vaush versus Tim Pool, they were together in the room then, and Vaush was like way more polite than he normally is and way more restrained. It's actually quite difficult to get really angry and aggressive with a person when they're right there. That was kind of nice, the heightened civility, although I think I mean, as I'll go into now, I think it would have been better if they'd been a little more critical of each other's views. The other interesting thing was that the moderator was present behind them, but didn't suggest any topic at all and just let them get on with it. So I watched an hour of this, I think, out of 2.5 hours, and the moderator didn't get involved once. Now, on one hand, that's completely fine because they were very civil and there was no need to correct their behavior or get them back on track. But the problem was there wasn't really a track to get on. They kind of meandered all over the place, talking about lots of different things. And as a result, there wasn't much debate. There wasn't much meat on the bones. I'm not sure what their core disagreements were. Vaush seemed more keen on just trumpeting his own quite vague and loose views. Destiny is someone I haven't looked at in particular on this channel before. Whenever I've tried, it's been him debating Vaush or him debating Sargon of Akkad. And every debate I've seen of his has broken down. Like, has been like, I can't analyze it because it just doesn't work as a debate. When he's debating Sargon, that's definitely Sargon's fault because Sargon just is not there to debate. He's trying to wind people up or something and only ever winds up himself and me. So the whole thing's pointless. But with Vaush, it just seems like it gets into slanging matches or they get hung up on some tiny point of detail that's not important. I don't want to say that is Destiny's fault because I can't identify what it is about Destiny's style that would cause that. But this debate, again, I eventually decide isn't worth analysing. I can't draw enough interesting points out of it. So I'll throw down my interesting observations. I hope they're interesting. And then we'll move on to the second debate with TJump, which I have more specific things to say on. What does make this debate interesting is because it was filmed last March when Corona is just kicking in, they're making their predictions about what this will mean. And Vaush, like I did, and I think a lot of people did, thinks that this sort of huge crisis will mean there has to be some kind of radical change, right? We have to change the way society works. In Britain, it was like, oh, we're going to have to start funding the NHS more, and nurses got like a 1% pay rise. So Vaush, I'm not going to rank their predictions or anything, but Vaush is basically wrong. Destiny correctly predicts that nothing will change. I don't know if he's correct. I mean, things have ended up changing slightly for the worse, I think. But Vaush's prediction that this sort of cataclysmic event will incite some sort of revolutionary further among the populace just isn't borne out at all. The opposite happened. A crisis hit, and people decided they just wanted just safety and normality. And so, in America, they voted for a 50-year career politician who ran on a return to normalcy ticket. And as I'll go into in a little more in a second, Vaush enthusiastically supported him, so I don't know what happened to the revolutionary ideals. In Britain, people are just stuck with the Tories, despite very bad coronavirus outcomes. They're way ahead in the polls. That doesn't seem to show any sign of changing. So what a lot of people were thinking of, oh, well, things will have to change now, the opposite was true. People just doubled down on conservatism. They do not want things to change. The problems with this debate start real early on. It's quite clear they're not sure what they're debating. Vaush seems to want to channel it towards a sort of revolutionary tactics versus Destiny's more sort of, we can just fix a few things here and there. We don't need a big, large-scale revolution, which Vaush obviously wants. He wants big change. Just from their moods, I think part of the problem is that these guys debate each other too often. They're too aware of each other's views. So things happen like Vaush talks about co-ops, and Destiny sort of says, well, I'll back co-ops if they work. And you think, okay, here's where Vaush explains how co-ops are a good idea and why they work and brings in the evidence. But he doesn't, because he's already had that debate with Destiny. At another point, Vaush just drops in that Destiny is not a fan of democracy, and Destiny agrees, and they don't talk about that. And I'm like, I thought Destiny was like a middle-of-the-road capitalist type. Is he against democracy? Does he just have problems with democracy? Like, that's something I would have thought Vaush would push harder on, that Destiny is anti-democratic, if that's true. But I have no idea because they don't discuss the issue in any depth. In general, Destiny just continually isn't drawn. I don't know why he signed on to a debate. It's almost like he doesn't want to debate because he doesn't want to lose. So he doesn't really put forward anything concrete that anyone could really disagree with. They both talk very generally. There's one moment that's really worth noting, which is when Vaush criticizes Barack Obama for not doing enough. And he thinks evidence for why we need like a large-scale revolution and big change. Of course, it's hilarious because Vaush will spend the rest of that year supporting Joe Biden. Again, the 50-year career politician who didn't promise to change anything and whose whole ticket was, remember the Obama years? We can go back to that. And Vaush was like, yes, please. At about half an hour in, I'm starting to think that maybe I won't make the whole debate. Vaush is just talking about rights being rolled back by the corporations. He offers no examples of this. He says that a revolution can change things and makes things better. He offers no examples of how they can make things better. He's just so inexact and fluffy through this whole thing. It's impossible to pin him down. And you think Destiny, if he was trying to win a debate, would be saying, well, what do you mean by that? What do you mean by that? Trying to back him into a corner and pin him down to actually saying something. But that never happens. Well, it doesn't happen in the first hour. Maybe it happens later. Destiny just lets Vaush waffle, saying nothing that I disagree with, but nothing concrete enough to really agree with either. Just nothing interesting. For the next half hour or so, Vaush keeps making noises about substantive change. He offers no examples. He just keeps talking. The straw that broke my back, this particular camel, comes from an hour to an hour and 2 minutes and a few odd seconds. Vaush talks for that 2 minutes, which isn't a very long time to talk. I had to watch it several times because he's saying words all the time, and the words make sense. He forms sentences that are recognizably English. I could not derive a point or meaning from what he was saying. It's very hard for me to explain why this is so weird, so go and watch that part if you can. If you can explain to me what Vaush is getting at and leave it in the comments, that would be great, because I had no idea, and I started to think, well, it's just not worth analysing this debate. And obviously I'm not here on YouTube for money or anything. I do really enjoy doing this, and I hope some of you out there get something out of it. But it was just too much effort to keep prizing through this word salad, trying to find what Vaush's point was, only so that I can realize, oh, it was just some general nonsense that it's not worth talking about anyway. I'll go over that 2 minutes here just to show that I did put some effort in. Essentially, he starts off saying he doesn't think all Trump supporters are bad people, which you wouldn't know from his channel output. And then he follows the structure he normally does in this debate with Destiny, which is to agree with what Destiny has said. Okay, Trump supporters aren't bad people. And then just list bad things Republicans have done. And then say something that had nothing to do with where he started and doesn't sound like he even did agree with Destiny. This is going to bridge nicely into the TJump debate where Vaush talks about being a social pragmatist. And I'll go over that in more depth. But essentially what's happening is Vaush isn't concerned with saying anything true or logical. He's just concerned with sending a message to the people watching. And that message is, don't be right-wing, don't support Donald Trump. And so he's basically useless in a debate at this point because there's no argument there. He's just propaganda, essentially. He just wants to get you to believe a certain thing and doesn't care how you get there, doesn't care if it's logic and reason, doesn't care if it's just scare words and that sort of way of manufacturing consent, as he likes to say, by pointing out that, hey, racists believe this kind of thing too. So that 2 minutes just kind of killed me, and I was like, okay, this man is not interested in debating things logically, and so there's no point trying to analyze him as a debater. As a conclusion, I'd say Destiny won the first hour of the debate. I wasn't particularly impressed with him. He seemed weary, and I don't blame him. It's exhausting watching Vaush, let alone actually trying to have a discussion with him. And I know they've been going back and forth for a while now. He must just be tired of the BS. He knows Vaush isn't going to engage on a logical level, so he knows it's pointless. His points, I didn't think he was saying anything radical. It was all agreeable. I didn't think much of it was very interesting. It all seemed broadly correct. So Destiny wins that debate. I'd like to go more now then into the debate he had with TJump on gender, specifically super straight. If you missed that particular meme, it's a new gender or a new sexual inclination that's been invented. It means that some people who are super straight, they only fancy, sexually attracted to, members of the opposite sex biologically. So they're not going to be sexually attracted to trans people, at least not knowingly, and that makes them super straight. And obviously there was a lot of discourse around this on Twitter, when people saying it was inherently transphobic, and other people saying, well, if you're going to open the door to have all these different sexual identities, you really can't complain when people make up identities you don't like. The whole thing was kind of interesting to me because it gets people talking about what is essentially metaphysics. And that's why I like the gender debate. Most people don't talk about metaphysics much. They don't do the whole, what is truth? What is beauty? What is justice? But they will sit around and talk about what is gender. So even if they don't know they're doing metaphysics, they really kind of are. But obviously it leads to a lot of bad arguments and fallacies, mistakes, because people don't really know how to discuss metaphysics on that level. Vaush is the same here. I did watch all of the debate with TJump, and throughout it's clear he doesn't get metaphysics, which is fine. You don't need to. It's not a very important topic. But like, it's pretty clear that he can't even distinguish between an actual thing that exists in the world, the concept we have in our minds to represent that thing, and the word we use to describe that concept. Now, philosophically, there are reasons that people might think that any 2 out of 3 of those are actually the same thing, or maybe all 3 are actually the same thing. But like, that takes a lot of very high level metaphysical arguing to come to those conclusions, and obviously Vaush doesn't provide that. Again, this is all fine. It's fine not to have, set metaphysical principles. Vaush, for the purposes of this debate, has to act like he does. He has to act like he does know what he's talking about when he doesn't, and that causes all kinds of problems. TJump, I'd say, comes across a lot better in this debate. He's not perfect, he makes some errors, but he definitely knows what the topic is and how to discuss metaphysics, whereas Vaush does not, which you can tell because there's a lot of instances here when TJump is just talking perfectly, sensible or at least traditional metaphysics that, anyone who's done philosophy will recognize, and Vaush is doing the fake laugh thing, which he does because it sounds silly to him because he knows nothing about the topic, so everything sounds weird. So despite his lack of grounding, he argues very fervently for this new conception of gender, which I think is that anyone can just self-identify as any gender, and there are basically as many genders as you can dream up, unless they're transphobic or whatever, like super straight. The content's not that important. What is important is that at the end, like after the debate is done, I think the video is an hour and a half, the debate's an hour, and then there's a Q&A half hour. And quite near the start of that half hour Q&A, Vaush admits that he doesn't really believe that and is actually a gender abolitionist, which is the position I hold and have argued for in a couple of videos on this channel earlier, the idea that gender is just a harmful social construct and you should do away with it. So why did he spend the previous hour arguing that gender was actually this thing that you could self-identify as, and that was very important to people and we needed to support them in belief? Well, he says it's because he's a social pragmatist. What this means is that he performs certain actions or says certain things or endorses certain views because he thinks it will make people happy. Not because the view is true or has been argued for, simply because it will make them happy. I felt completely robbed by this for a lot of reasons. One, it completely undermined everything he was saying in the previous hour, because it turns out all the mistakes he made, he doesn't actually care about those mistakes. You could go through and point out why he's wrong, and he might agree with you, but it's not going to matter, because he didn't believe in it anyway. He only is saying these things, according to him, for social pragmatism, to make other people happy. By analogy, it's like watching a Catholic debate a Protestant about the nature of God. And then at the end, the Catholic is just like, well, actually, I'm an atheist anyway. I don't really believe in God. But there are more Catholics than Protestants in the audience, and I wanted to make them happy. So that's what I went with. Not only this, but it isn't clear that he is a social pragmatist. I mean, for one, how could he possibly know which views would cause more happiness in the world? I mean, there are probably way more gender conservatives than there are people who have this sort of radical new notion of gender. So why isn't he backing that one? How does he figure that? It seems to me that the views Vaush thinks are the best for social pragmatism will also be the views he likes on his own, right? It's just a confirmation bias thing. I doubt there's many instances where Vaush thinks something is true and wants to endorse that on his channel, but then thinks, oh, but that would make people unhappy, so I'd better not do that. Which, of course, leads into the second point, which is that Vaush is principled. He has principles and beliefs and seems quite rigid about those. It doesn't seem like he'd change his beliefs if he thought that society had changed or different things would make different people happy. Like, if you imagine Vaush as he is now being moved into a hard right-wing society, right, where he can only talk and discuss things with right-wing people, like, you'd think if he's a social pragmatist, he'd start saying right-wing things, right, to make all the other people happy. But of course, it's Vaush, and he's quite entrenched in his views, and he would never do that. To recap, this is such a weird pyramid of BS at this point. The arguments he presented in the debate were bad. That turns out it's because he doesn't believe in them himself. He's actually a gender abolitionist. He only said he believed in the new gender identity laws to make people happy because he's a social pragmatist, but also his understanding of social pragmatism is flawed, and he's not doing what's best socially pragmatically, and doesn't do that anyway. He's just got his views, and if you tell him the views are wrong and point out why and how they're wrong, he'll simply say, well, social pragmatism, bro. I just say what I think makes people happy. So ultimately then, this is why I'm giving up on Vaush. There's simply no point trying to analyze this anymore. The views aren't meant to make sense. The views he endorses, he might not believe himself. If you actually criticize them and point out why they don't make sense, he'll just retreat to the social pragmatism thing, which he also doesn't know how to justify. So it's just a whole mountain of rubbish. There's no core value or logic to be criticized. Moving on to some general themes in Vaush's channel recently. I mean, the last year has been difficult for Vaush, I would think, because he's supposed to be this radical socialist communist, but because America's a two-party system, he had to latch on to the more left-wing party, the Democrats, and they're not very left-wing. He had to enthusiastically support Joe Biden, who, you know, I have no idea how, but seems to have tricked a bunch of progressives into voting for him, despite the fact that he's, you know, a white millionaire person who's been accused of sexual assault on several occasions. I won't go any further than that, but, you know, believe her. And he's been in American politics for 50 years. He voted against gay marriage, and Vaush had to support that guy, and he looks foolish. Then coronavirus comes along, and suddenly this anti-establishment radical change guy is suddenly saying, well, it's probably a good idea to listen to what the government tells you to do for health reasons. Those two events, the election where Vaush had to support a very middle-of-the-road candidate, and not even like a good middle-of-the-road candidate, not an Obama, a confused old man, and also had to, for a year, support the government in, quite authoritarian measures, whether you think they're justified or not. It's weird to see a radical telling you to support the government and just do as you're told. That's just doesn't scan well. Possibly some of this is out of like a commitment to Biden. He supported him for that year, now feels he can't really criticize him, which means there's just a lack of it's a radical channel that doesn't criticize the current establishment. What's the point? I think his video titles are becoming increasingly misleading. The content is just bizarre occasionally. He spent like a quarter of an hour analyzing a TikTok from Grimes, a political one where she makes a proposition for the communists. And like, it's a 30-second TikTok. Vaush says in his video it might be a joke, so what's the point of that? Another video, he talks about how Tucker Carlson said on air that segregation was the worst thing that ever happened in America. But when he said that, before he said worst, Tucker made a mouth movement like, so Vaush infers from that Tucker was going to say best. And then Vaush adds that Tucker never makes mistakes in his videos, and so this was deliberate signaling. He was deliberately saying to his watchers, I think segregation was the best thing that happened to America. So you end up with a position where Tucker Carlson said segregation is the worst thing that happened to America, and Vaush gets to release a video explaining how Tucker Carlson supports segregation. Utterly bizarre. The title of that video was Tucker Carlson Goes Mask Off About Segregation. And it's just a continuation of what I was talking about in my last video on Vaush, where he analyzes Ariel Scarcella and Gothics. He just seems to have no real enemies anymore, so he has to invent them. Like, he has to invent all these white supremacists so he can take them down. But it's all just Don Quixote tilting at windmills. They're not really there. So to wrap up, that's why I'm giving up on Vaush, at least for now. I know it sounds pretty dramatic, but if you guys want to suggest any debates that Vaush is in and say, no, really, this is a good debate, I will give it a look. I'm not swearing off him for life. But I just feel like there's a combination of factors that have really led to a drop in quality, and I don't think he had a high baseline to start. It's the poor debating that's undermined by these weird sort of meta positions of social pragmatism that ultimately means he can just never admit that he's wrong, because he can just say, well, even if what I said made no sense, at least it made people happy, so that's as good as being true, right? It's the fact that now the party he supported are in power, so he should be happy and not complaining, but like, he's a radical socialist. What's he going to do if he can't complain? And finally, just the constant videos on just nothing topics, just storming teacups, nothing really to say. So for a while at least, I won't be actively analysing Vaush. So the question is, what am I going to do on this channel? I want to continue with debate analysis because I enjoy doing it. If I see any debates that I like, I'll put out an analysis on this channel, and like I said, if you guys want to suggest any in the comments, I'll definitely get on that. Otherwise, I might make a few just rambling topic videos on things I want to talk about, like the British university system, British prison system, Brexit. That's something I've wanted to get off my chest for a while now, and ethics, which I always like talking about. Some of the stuff won't be more vloggy, but I'm kind of making some life changes coming up, and I might be talking about that a bit more as well, and try and tie that into sort of ethical themes. But for now, thank you very much for watching. I hope you continue watching the channel despite the lack of Vaush criticism, and I will see you next time. Goodbye.